We'll hear from Pete Bacho, who is a prominent writer known best for Cebu, but I really loved one of his first books, Dark Blue Suits, which if you haven't read, is really worthwhile. In his more recent work, Uncle Rico's Encore, which talks a lot about the Filipinos and experience in the central area. He teaches at Evergreen State and University of Washington, Tacoma.
Welcome to the most important city in Filipino America. And this I do not exaggerate. When you look at the accomplishments of what people living here in Seattle were able to do, first of all, you have my father's generation, which was able to put together the effort to establish the Rizal Park. You guys know where Rizal Park is? It was looking a lot better way back when, but not so much now. But that's not necessarily their fault. And I asked my uncle Vic, why are you working so hard on this? And he says, "You ever been called a monkey? That's why." And then my generation, particularly Bobby Santos, who was a good cop to my bad cop, we organized and we protested. In the 70s, we got housing for our elderly in Chinatown, hundreds of units. You compare that with other housing movements elsewhere, and it just pales in comparison. This is Seattle. But the most important is someone that Dorothy knows well, Chris Mensalvas, the communist president of ILWU Local 37, which in my opinion was the most significant organization of any Filipino organization up and down the West Coast during the time I was living in the central area, from basically 1 till 21, 22, somewhere around in there. Because it allowed people who are otherwise migrant farm workers to stop being migrant farm workers. In other words, the salaries were good enough that they could eventually stop being migrant farm workers, buy a home in the central area, and start the process of raising families, of which I am one of the products. Right? The union was the most important thing, in my opinion, and was led for years and years by this communist labor leader, Chris Mensalvas, who was a close friend of mine. But here's the story on Mensalvas, and this is kind of a hidden history. You guys never have heard of it. I will bet on it. And I compare Chris to the great Itliang, the one who led the Delano strike. Young Filipinos have gone to Delano, and it includes a curse word, so if people are offended by curse word, too bad. And it's a curse word that describes the attitude of at least two generations, the old timers and my generation. We're not all into bontok dancing, to be honest. Young Filipinos have gone to Delano, visiting, writing about, and producing films focused on Larry Itliang and the pivotal Filipino role in the '65 Delano grape strike. In terms of shifting, defiant moments in Pinoy history, it is hard to top Itliang and the Delano Pinoys for what they did in 1965. But such a moment does exist in Seattle. It's all but forgotten details described in a lawsuit argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, ILWU Local 37 versus Boyd. This is 1954. Every spring, Local 37 sent thousands of Pinoys north to Alaska salmon canneries. But the United States was in the middle of the communist hunting tsunami unleashed by Senator Joseph McCarthy, and Boyd, the Seattle-based District Director of Immigration Naturalization Services, INS, was more than happy to do his part. His target, Local 37. In 1953, Boyd's office twisted federal immigration law and threatened to treat aliens domiciled in the continental United States returning from temporary work in Alaska as if they were aliens entering the United States for the first time. By 1953, many of Local 37's members had become American citizens, including my dad. against whom Boyd's threat would not apply, but others were not. When the Philippines became independent in 1946, it cut the legal tie between America and its former colony. It also changed the status of thousands of Pinoys overnight. Despite decades in America, they lost their protected status as American nationals. Aliens are what they became. And under U.S. law, aliens seeking entry to the United States for the first time could be excluded for any number of reasons, including disfavored political alliances. Chris Mensalvas, the local's president, was the unreachable itch that triggered Boyd's obsession. Among Filipinos, the one-legged Mensalvas was legendary, committed, courageous, and tough. And Pinoys, no strangers to hardship, admire these traits. But he was also an unabashed communist, unforgivable during the paranoia of the McCarthy era, when many Americans yearned for peace and for simple answers to the questions raised by an increasingly complex and hostile post-war world. 1945, the U.S. and its allies had defeated fascism. Yet just the next year, Winston Churchill warned of an Iron Curtain caused by the Soviet Union's aggressive westward expansion. Then in 1949, China, an important wartime ally, fell to communist forces in that country's civil war. And finally, in 1950, American soldiers were battling Chinese communists on the Korean Peninsula. The speed and sheer scope of the global changes were breathtaking, not at all to America's liking. Within this unsettling milieu, Senator Joe McCarthy provided the snake oil to soothe the nation's jangled nerves. Subversives, he claimed, were the problem, and he knew where they were. Communists and sympathizers could be found in government, universities, labor unions, the arts. His charges, most of which were unfounded, were dutifully reported by a meek and uncritical American press, but in the early 1950s, the McCarthy era had shaped the tenor of American life, giving rise to blacklists, arrests, guilt by innuendo and association, terminations, and ruined lives. In those days, the INS building, and Dorothy, you'll remember this, the INS building and Local 37's headquarters were within walking distance of each other, right? Yeah? It must have galled Boyd and other immigration officials. The communist-led union could be so brazen as to openly operate and thrive in the agency's backyard. Hence the threat in 1953. INS's goal, I am sure, was to force the rank and file to remove Mensalvas. But he continued as president until 1959, or 5 years after McCarthy was censured by the Senate, and 2 years after McCarthy's death in 1957. And each spring, and despite the threat, Local 37 would send Pinoys north for decades to come. But why were these workers, most of whom were not communists, so unfailingly loyal to a marked man? For starters, group solidarity, strengthened by years of racial hostility, had become an article of faith shared by members of the first Pinoy generation. This is how we survived. But that's not all. In 1984, I wrote this about Mensalvas. They stayed loyal to Chris because he understood them and their needs, and he spoke their language. That was his magic. He could speak to anyone. That person would believe, or at least want to believe. Chris's talent, that human touch, worked in spite of his ideology, not because of it. In retrospect, the rank and file's defiance was both brave and audacious during a time when other Americans drew their shades, cowered in their homes, and turncoats kept busy naming names. But not at Local 37, where union members made substantially clear that they, not the federal government, would choose who they wanted to lead them. That's our decision. It's who we are, the old Pinoys said. And, oh, one more thing, Mr. Boyd, Mr. Big Shot, Mr. Polished Floor Shine Shoes, fuck you. That was the attitude held by two generations. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.